Hi, this is Chris, and you're watching Map Proctoring 101. We made this video to try to help out teachers who were giving the map test to their students, and I hope you find it helpful. If you have any questions after you're done, feel free to let me know. Thanks. Okay, hopefully if you're watching this, you're on a page that looks something like this. It's the school district website. The video should be playing right here, I hope. Take a look down below. There is a map training form I've embedded here. You can put your name and pick your school site here, and there's several questions to answer as you go through the training. When you get to the very end, notice there's a submit button. If you hit that, it will send all your responses to me, and we'll be able to tell that you went through the training. On the website there's also some materials I've uploaded that you can download and have your own copy of. If you look right here on the sidebar on the website under map testing resources, you should see map training downloads. If you can't see it, just click on this double arrow and it should appear, and eventually it should load. There we go. And there are 5 files that you can download here. You'll need those throughout the training and as references afterwards while you're trying to give the test. The first file that you can download here is called a field guide to map testing, and this is a document I created to try to help you the day of the testing. The idea here is that you can print this out and have it with you while you give the test to refer to. It's a step-by-step directions with screenshots included. The second file here is called PowerPoint for Training Students, and this is a resource that was created by the folks at NWEA for teachers to use while trying to teach their classes how to take a map test. This is going to be especially important for you third grade teachers whose students are taking the test for the very first time. This is what it looks like in PowerPoint. It goes through some basics for the students, and what I really like is that it has some screenshots of what the test will look like so you can prepare your students in advance. This is the start screen, and it goes through what a question screen would look like. So you can use that to talk to your students and make sure they're clear on how to take the test. The third resource listed here is the Proctor Handbook. That was also created by the folks at NWEA, and it has tons of good information that you might need in proctoring the test. I've gone through this, and we'll be talking about most of the important stuff today, but just in case, this is here as a reference if you need to use it. And the fourth thing on the list is a teacher handbook, again put out by the folks who make the map test, and it has a lot of information for teachers to use, mainly after the testing is complete, when you're ready to look at reports. So when the time comes, you might want to pull this out. It's included for your reference. And the last thing on the list is a link to the NWEA training. If you download that link and click it, it'll take you to a site that looks like this. And this is a 43-minute long presentation that walks you through the testing process. So if you'd like to refer to that, feel free. So here's our slide on today's purpose. Really our goal here is to walk you through the steps required to give the map test so that you're comfortable with the processes you need to follow, and to provide you some resources that you can use during the testing process. So we'll start with the basics here. I keep referring to the MAP test, but if you've never heard of that before, MAP is an acronym. It stands for the Measure of Academic Progress, and it's a computerized test that we use to assess our students' ability in reading, language usage, math, and science. In case you've never seen it before, this is what a question of the MAP test looks like. This is an example of a reading question. There's a passage at the top, question here in blue, and then the answer choices down below. Here's what a math question would look like. Again, we have the question in blue, the answer choices, and this one's a little different because it has a calculator built into the program. So when a calculator is allowed on the test, the button will appear. The student can click on it to open the calculator, use their mouse to hit the buttons, and when they're done they can click Hide Calculator to make it go away.
The MAP test is an adaptive test designed to meet the needs of a wide range of learners. This concept is covered in the MAP administration training. The test items adjust in difficulty as a student responds correctly or incorrectly. Because the MAP test is adaptive, every student in the testing lab will be receiving a customized test.
Okay, so basically what they're saying here is that this test changes according to how well or how poorly the student does on each question. If you've ever taken the GRE, it's very similar. So if you get a correct answer, it gets harder. If you are incorrect, it will give you an easier question to try to determine your level of ability. This is important to explain to our students because the test will always, every student will experience some difficulty because the test is going to get harder and harder for them until it becomes challenging. So it's just helpful to clue the kids into that in advance so that they don't get too frustrated and feel too bad about themselves when they start to get to questions they don't know the answers to. So please explain that to them in advance. Here's some more basic information about the MAP test. One thing to note here is that it is untimed. There's no time limit on the test. They suggest that it'll take from 30 to 45 minutes for most students. But in some cases, you'll have a few kids that will take longer. Another thing that's really great about the MAP test is that it provides immediate results. You don't have to wait 3 weeks for results the way you do for SBAs. The score is given at the very end of the test, so immediate. This says here that you can test up to 4 times a year, but our district does not do that. We only test 3 times a year, which you can see here on our assessment schedule. So here's some things to consider when you're setting up your schedule for MAP testing. Again, when you're making your schedule, keep in mind that the test is untimed, so you need to have a plan of what you're going to do with the students who haven't finished at the end of their time slot. It's suggested that the students only take 1 subject per day to avoid testing fatigue. We all know our brains become mush after testing, so you'll probably get better results if you don't test all at one time. The test proctor, or whoever is giving the tests, will need some time to set up the lab between the rounds of testing. There's a lot of things that have to be done to every single machine for a student to test. I'm going to walk you through that in just a second so you'll see what I mean, but just keep this in mind when you're making your schedule that you need a good chunk of time between the testing sessions. Here are some things that we'd like you to think about before the testing begins. Number one is that just talk with your students about the importance of the test. So just try to explain to the kids that it's important and get them to do their best. You also probably want to talk about how the testing works. The process is a little different than a bubble test they might be used to. That's when the PowerPoint will really come in handy that I showed you earlier. You can walk them through the sample questions here. You can talk about some specific things, like for example on the reading test here, notice there's a scroll bar that the students will have to scroll down in order to see the whole passage. That's something that I think a lot of our students might not notice on their own or be aware of if they're not familiar with computers, so point that out to them in advance. You also probably want to talk about testing strategies, how to go about making an educated guess, narrowing down answer choices, things like that. One common testing strategy, though, that will not work on the MAP test is to skip the questions you don't know and come back to them later. On the MAP test, you cannot go forward without selecting an answer, and you cannot go back and change your answers. So just keep that in mind when you're talking to your students about the test. Number 3, the test proctor is going to have to do a little bit of preparation in advance. There's some materials that you have to have with you when you're giving the test. For example, the day of the math test, you have to have some scratch paper for the students to work out their math problems. So make sure you have that handy. So they'll need pencils to do that. For after the test is over, you may want to have some books handy so that your students can just quietly read while others finish. Some test proctors like to have a seating chart so they know which student will sit at which desk so they can set the computer up in advance. So if that's the way that you plan to process the test, then just keep that in mind. You need a seating chart. The last screen of the test will give you the results. If you want to capture those results on paper, you might want to make a little chart in advance with each student's name so you can write down their scores. You'll probably want a testing sign of some type to hang outside your door just to let people know that your students are busy testing and they shouldn't be disturbed. And student ID numbers. If the test proctor is not the regular classroom teacher, then they may not be as familiar with the spelling of students' names, and I think that student ID numbers might be handy in that situation. So it's just something to think about there as a way to look the students up in the testing database, which I'll show you how to do in just a second. Last thing to think about before the test is how your room is arranged. The proctor is going to need to be able to walk around the room to monitor the testing, make sure there's open pathways. It's handy if you can see multiple computer screens or all the computer screens at one time. So if it's possible to arrange your room in a way that that's possible, just give a little thought how your room is set up. If you're testing on laptops, you're going to have chargers and power strips set up to keep the computers on the whole day of testing. So just plan that out. So on the day of testing, there's a lot of steps you have to follow, and this is where the field guide should come in handy. So I'm going to switch over to that so we can go through it. This walks you through everything that you need to do in the computer lab the day of testing. It starts by logging in. Every school has a specific login name. It's named after the 3-letter abbreviation for your school and the word map. So for Kaktovik, they would be the account to log into the computer would be CAC map. For Apollic, it's IPK and map. All of these accounts, the password is testing. So that's what you'll need to enter in the login box. Okay, once you log in, you'll see a blank screen. Notice it should be pretty minimal. We've tried to get rid of all the distractions and just focus on, try to create a pleasant testing environment. At the bottom, you'll see Test Taker. That's what you open. You should see a screen that looks like this. Sometimes there's a little delay. It takes some time to get going, so just be patient. Let it load. Just wait. Eventually, you should see a box pop up that looks like this. You'll need to click that little plus sign right there to expand the options, and then you want to look for volumes, and again click the plus sign. And you'll find your testing data in a folder that's named again after your school site with NTE. So Apollic is IPK, Kaktovik would be KAK, so on and so forth. So click on that folder, and then you click the OK button. And now you'll be asked to enter your proctor username and password. This will be given to you by your principal, or I can provide it to you if you let me know that you need it. But please notice that it is not to be shared with students. We've had some incidents at some of our schools where teachers have written the password on the board or just passed it out to students so that they could log in themselves, and that is not advisable. Please keep it confidential. So you enter your username and password and click Next. The next screen is the test selection screen. Here you have to choose which subject you're testing and then pick the test that you want to give to the student. So again, we test on math, science, language usage, or reading. And the test that we give is always the one that says with goals. So in the case of math, we would give the math survey with goals. 6+ means it's for 6th grade and above. So this would be all of our secondary students. Elementary students would take math survey with goals 2 through 5. Okay, once you've selected the right test, you click Add, and it'll get moved down to the list, to the box at the bottom, and then you click Next. Now you have to find the student that's going to be testing on this machine. And you can do that a couple different ways. You can type in the student's last name, their first name, or their student ID number. This is what I was saying. If you don't know the students, you don't know how to spell their name, having their ID number handy might be the easiest way to look them up. That's up to you. But put in enough information here and you should get some search results in this box. Click on the student that you want to test on this machine. and they should appear in the selected student box here at the bottom, and then you'll click Finish. Okay, now that you've selected the student, you should see the start screen. It looks like this. The test proctor needs to get all the machines in the lab to this space before the students enter the testing environment. So you have the students sit at the machine that has their name, and they're supposed to wait for directions. They do not start right away. Okay, once you have the kids settled in their right seats, you need to go over the procedures for what they should do when they're finished. Remind them that they need to stay quiet and they need to do the best on their test, and that you need to read the instructions word for word out of the Proctor Handbook. I'm going to switch over to that so you can see where those are. So there's directions here for each of the tests. Here's the directions for the math test, and you read this word for word, just like you do on every standardized test. Here are the directions for the science, and below you'll find the ones for the reading and language usage. You'll want to make sure that every student is at the right machine with the correct name appearing on the screen. And when it's time to begin the test, they suggest staggering the start times. So instead of having all your students hit start at the exact same time and overloading the network, it might be smart to say, okay, all the boys click start, and then wait a few seconds, and then have the girls start, or people whose names start with A, or whatever system you like to use. Just try to stagger the start times by a few seconds to relieve some of the pressure on the network. During the test, it's important that the proctor is monitoring the students. It's not the time to read a book or grade papers. You need to be circling the room, keeping track of how students are doing. Some students have a bad habit of just clicking through answers without giving it any thought, so you'd want to try to stop that from happening. Make sure that no one's getting out of the test-taking program and switching to, opening up Safari or something like that. So just be vigilant. During the test, if you have any problems, there's a couple of options you have as the proctor. Sometimes a test question and answers will not load all the way, so maybe the test item will appear, but there's no answer choices. So you need to refresh the page, and to do that, you use the keyboard shortcut Control, Shift R. If for whatever reason you need to stop or pause a test in the middle of testing, the keyboard shortcut for that is Control Shift P. So if you press Control Shift P on the keyboard, you'll get a screen that requests the proctor username and password. So you'll need to type that in, but please keep, again, don't let the students see what you're typing, right? The password's a secret. When the students finish testing, you'll get a screen that looks something like this. It has the student's name, their score, and the range of scores on the different strands. So if it's up to your site what you want to do with this information. Some sites like to have the proctor write it down. Some sites take a screenshot of this screen and save it for later. Some sites don't record it at all, and they just wait for when the test results come out from NWA. It's up to you and your site how you want to handle that, but just know that if you want your results right away, you need to capture the score off of this screen before you move on to the next student testing. To take a screenshot, by the way, Command Shift 3. Okay, at the end of each of your testing day, you need to make sure all the computers that were used for testing are shut down. If the computer stays on and has the test taker program open, then we here at IT cannot upload your testing data because the database will be locked because it's still open. So please make sure you shut down your computers, and then please send Infotech an email that says that you're done testing for the day, that you have some data we need to upload. We have 11 different schools, they're all testing on different days, and so we don't upload data for every school every day. So you need to let us know that you've taken some tests and we need to upload it, or that will not happen. Okay, so that's the field guide. It should walk you through step by step everything you need to know the day of the test. So if you forget what you hear in the video, at least you'll have this to refer to. Okay, so that was the field guide. Here are just a couple of things to think about when you're setting up your testing environment. It's really important that the students are able to test in a quiet environment, so maybe let the maintenance department know that the day of testing is not the best time to polish the floors in the hallway or to replace the roof. Obviously, no outside resources are allowed on the test, so students should not be using dictionaries or the internet or any kind of resource, really. They're only allowed to use scratch paper on the math test, and the calculator for the math test is an on-screen calculator, so they do not need calculators. No electronics, actually, so no cell phones, nothing like that. Oh, accommodations. If you have students that are on IEPs, some accommodations are allowed on the test. You'll want to look at pages 8 and 9 of the Proctor Handbook that explains which accommodations are allowed. Note the only calculator that is available is the one that shows up on the screen on the test. It'll be there for some questions and it will not be there for some other questions, but a student is not allowed to use their own calculator. One of the accommodations that's suggested is that you can read aloud some instructions for the students, but that only applies to the math and science test. You cannot read aloud any part of the reading or language usage tests, because the whole point is that they want to see if they can read. Oh, one last thing.